In recent weeks, I have been doing some research on MMA movies and documentaries for a piece that I may or may not be writing. And you might be saying research, but Kyle, watching movies and documentaries about the sport that you love is not really research. You haven't watched, my friends, some of the movies that I've watched, because if you did, you would realize that I am not doing it for my own enjoyment. So you can take that with you, that you didn't have to watch all three Never Back Down movies. Unlike me, you didn't go through these struggles. One of the documentaries that I watched was particularly relevant on this week of all weeks due to UFC 302 going down this Saturday night in Newark, New Jersey. Of course, in the main event, Dustin Poirier will make his 40th professional appearance inside of a cage to take on the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev. He, of course, is an underdog, the Diamond. Many people didn't think he would get this shot, and it could potentially be the last fight of his career. He's kind of hinted at that on fight week, said that maybe, win or loss, he could retire. I don't personally think it'll happen, but like I said, particularly relevant, a sort of movie that I watched to the Dustin Poirier story, because in many ways it is somewhat of an origin story for Dustin Poirier, and that is, of course, the movie Fightville, which we're going to be talking about today. It was a documentary put out in 2011. It takes place mostly in 2009, I do believe, and it centers around a couple of fighters out of the Gladiators Academy gym in Louisiana, where, of course, Dustin Poirier is from. So the documentary takes place, if you can see there, where he lost to Danny Castillo on his WEC debut. I believe it's the three fights below that the documentary centers around. I can't remember the names exactly, but I believe it's the three there. One of them happening on Ringside MMA, which happens right at the end of the documentary, and the other two being USA MMA, which is kind of where it centers around for the majority of the documentary. Like I said, came out in 2011. It was by filmmakers Michael Tucker and Petra Eppeline. I watched this on YouTube. It was available to rent. So I did have to pay for it. I believe you can rent it on like Prime Video and things like that. So either or. But here's kind of a cliff notes, I suppose, things that I noted down that I thought might be of interest to people who either haven't seen this documentary, maybe they haven't seen it in a long time, because of course you get a very early shot, a look even at Dustin Poirier in his earlier career. I'm sure a lot of people remember what Poirier was like in his early UFC days, and of course this isn't that far behind that, so you might know some of these things already. But either way, the first thing that struck me about this documentary, you can tell that it was made around 2010, and I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily, but first of all, the general vibe, I think the way that the people talk about the sport of MMA, it gives me that kind of underground fight feel of some of those movies that I was making fun of in the intro, like the Never Back Down movies and things like that, where that was kind of the perception of MMA at the time. And I think there's some editing choices in the documentary that also make it feel very much like 2010. Freeze frames as a transition. I kind of love them, but we don't see them too much. It centers around a few main people. Like I said, Dustin Poirier, of course, is kind of the main character, the main person you follow. You also follow his teammate at the gym, Albert Steinbach, who we will talk about a little bit later. You learn a lot about their coach, Tim Credeur, at the time. And there's a promoter who hosts the USA MMA. It does make me laugh that I believe he speaks about how he goes to the gym to spar with the fighters that he's going to book on the show to see if they're any good, which is, I mean, that's, if that doesn't scream 2010s MMA, I don't know what does. The first fight happening in like a rodeo arena is hilarious as well. This is might be a bit of a deep cut reference, but it reminded me very much of the opening of Real Steel for anyone that saw that Hugh Jackman robot boxing movie. Again, I apologize, vague reference maybe, but that made me laugh a lot. You get a bit of, I believe it was Poirier's mum is talking about his kind of rough upbringing and how he used to fight in boxing matches in his local neighborhood with the other kids. And Poirier once went to court there was an older kid that went to his house and called him out and said, "Hey, you're yet to fight me." And Poirier ended up breaking this kid's teeth. I believe he was older than Poirier. He could have been younger. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I believe he was older. So yeah, so this kid came to challenge him, and Poirier broke his teeth, and he ended up going to juvenile jail. All of this stuff, which I'm sure people will be familiar with. Poirier, when he's training for one of the fights in this documentary, he starts at 200 pounds, which is kind of crazy, I think, when you think about how old Poirier is in this documentary compared to now. Like, obviously, he's still a lightweight today. He previously fought at featherweight as well. The start of his UFC career was at featherweight, but I can't imagine he cuts a ton now. So I'd be interested to see how often he weighs 200 pounds nowadays. So, as I mentioned, it isn't just about Poirier, it is about Albert Steinbach. And I think that kind of a crucial part of this documentary, which kind of gets explored, in my opinion, I think it could have been explored more, is you see Poirier's trajectory, right? He's very dedicated and he has big dreams of turning his life around. And of course, we know the story of Dustin Diamond Poirier. He did that and much, much more. And of course, has helped turn other people's lives around in the process. But Steinbach kind of goes in and out of being dedicated, and as a result, his pro career doesn't really take off, and you kind of get that symmetry between the two of them and how they've gone down these different paths in their lives. I think again it could probably be explored more. I don't think you get tons of Albert in this. Of course, as Poirier keeps winning throughout the documentary, you are going to want to follow him a lot, but I think that maybe there's space to go into that more. But another thing of this documentary is Poirier just tearing through people. The people he fights, like, and I'm not saying that the opponents aren't good. They make a big deal out of, oh, he's gonna fight this guy who's a black belt, blah blah blah. Poirier just runs through these dudes. Like, again, people who have seen his early fights in the UFC and even the WEC fights, his boxing was always pretty good. His accuracy is very good. His shot selection is very good, and he's got very good submissions too. And so he just seems to light these people up. They can't hang with him on the feet, and then he subs them when the fights hit the ground. You will see that a lot in this documentary. I don't know if he did this for all of his fights, but definitely the final fight in the documentary, walking out to God's Gonna Cut You Down by Johnny Cash. I don't know if he ever did that in the UFC, but in my opinion, that should have been Poirier's trademark. I know that it's maybe a little bit stereotypical, but I don't know. I think it's so cool personally. So yeah, he comes into the final fight, and they say, if you win this, he's probably going to get signed to the UFC. He faces Derek Gautier, and Gautier walks out to, I'm saying Gautier like the singer, but Gautier, pronunciation, I don't know. I apologize. Peak 2009 move from him though, walking out to Remember the Name by Fort Minor. I mean, if that doesn't scream 2009, I don't know what does, and I'm all for it. And Poirier absolutely wrecks him in 57 seconds of the first round. And they hype up this guy that he's fighting quite some time, only for Poirier to absolutely dismantle him. I think that this documentary is a really worthwhile watch if you are in any way, shape, or form a fan of Dustin Poirier, who I don't know how you can be personally. It really shows you, I think, the change that Poirier has gone through throughout his MMA career, because whilst you definitely see shades, things that you can see in him today that were there back then, he's a very, very different guy from all that time ago. You can definitely feel the anger and aggression, the intensity before he fights. It is crazy, because I compared to now, you see Poirier in interviews, he's talking about being the leader of the silly goose gilly train, or however he's marketing it. I mean, fair play to him. I think it's hilarious. So, and I love Poirier, so I'm not complaining by any means. Imagine if he wins by guillotine this weekend. That'd be crazy. So I love it, but you see a very, very different side to Poirier. The Poirier that used to be in street fights as a kid, the Poirier that went into MMA because he liked fighting. And of course, like I said, you see a very different version of the Diamond now. And it's kind of crazy to see this old version of him and look at how far he's come, the person that he is today, but also obviously a remarkable journey. So getting a glimpse of it before he made it to the WEC, before he made it to the UFC, it is a really fascinating watch. Obviously, incredibly, I don't want to say fortunate, because that makes it sound like I'm not giving the documentary makers any skill, like credit, but of course, incredibly fortunate that you would pick a fighter who at the time would have been 3-0 when they 4-0, sorry, when they started the documentary. And this is 13 years ago, 15 years ago, if it's 2009, and they happened to pick Dustin Poirier, who I think, I know that he only won the interim title. He's yet to win a full world championship. I know that some people get a little bit murky about that kind of stuff. Of course, he could beat Islam Makhachev this weekend, and this point would be irrelevant. But I think Dustin Poirier is a Hall of Famer. Some of the fights that he's had, the longevity, some of the incredible fights he's had. And like I said, of course, a former interim champion as well. I think Poirier should be a Hall of Famer. So the fact that they managed to get, an early part of a future UFC Hall of Famer's career is incredible. Like I said, worth your time. Go and check it out, especially if you want to get yourself excited to watch Dustin Poirier challenge for the lightweight title this weekend. at Newark, New Jersey for UFC 302. Thank you for checking out this video. I will see you all very soon. If I don't, enjoy the fights.